The views expressed on the Nova Society are those of the panelists and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Phoenix Research Institute or any institution which any panel member is associated. Welcome back to the Nova Society, a space where dialogue deepens understanding and civic responsibility comes to life. I'm Dr. Mark Bound, joined by our regular panel, Dr. Scott Gershwer and Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon. Together, we'll unpack the stories that matter most, exploring the headlines, the history, and the big ideas shaping today's conversations. Let's dive in and hear what the panel has for us today.
And today we have a question from John from Tempe, Arizona. And John writes, I've listened to the Nova Society for over 3 years now and enjoy the show. I teach political theory at the local university, ASU, and my classes are in a heated discussion regarding the state of politics in America today. I have listened with interest to your take regarding the Trump presidency. I think the panel has some different views as to what and why we are seeing what we are seeing. This may be an unusual request, but I hope the panel will consider it. My class cannot agree if Trump is the symptom or the disease. They cannot decide if the problem is the system, just Trump, or the people. They also cannot come up with a clear plan on how to fix the current state of American politics. I was wondering if the panel would take up these questions, and with your permission, I'd like to present that episode to my 5 classes to further our discussions. Thank you for considering this request. So, John, absolutely, please. Thank you for being a consistent listener. We feel honored and privileged, and please do share these with your classes, Mark and Scott.
What do we want to tackle first?
First of all, I want to say that I've been to Arizona State University. When I graduated college, me and a friend drove across the country, and we were comfortable with colleges, so we tended to go, we went to Arizona State University and hung out there rather than go into the Grand Canyon. So, we didn't want to do touristy stuff. We wanted to see the country. And Arizona State, beautiful place, and a lot of blondes. We're very impressed. Very interesting joint. And I know that they're just beginning to offer a master's degree in war, which I think, if you're looking for adjuncts or assistant professors or anything like that, we can help you there. Really, really interesting idea to get a master's degree in war. It's not going to be what it used to be. So there's a lot to study there. But yep. Let's start with the kids, shall we?
Sure.
The kids, students. Thank you. I'm humbled that your professor has asked us to do this. We all are very, very pleased to help. I think it all starts with the Powell memo, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah.
Right. 1971.
Yep.
The Lewis Powell, who wrote a letter to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and said, these lefties are going to destroy free market capitalism unless we do something about it. And his memo basically, laid out the idea that we need to think tanks, we need to capture the judiciary, and we have to have our own media because the media is too left-wing oriented. And that's basically what changed conservatism from what it had been under William F. Buckley Jr.
Yep.
To what it is now. And you can trace the rise of Donald Trump from the Powell memo, I think. What do you think of that?
I would totally agree with that. And just to bring a little clarity, if you're unaware of the Powell memo, this was written to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce by Lewis F. Powell Jr., who was a lawyer. He was a corporate lawyer, and it was a blueprint. In a lot of ways, it was the Heritage Foundation in some earlier form. And the core premise was that American free enterprise system was under broad attack from the media, academia, politicians, and intellectuals. That was the core premise of the whole thing. And he wanted to control academia. He wanted to control what you're allowed to read. He wanted the college campuses to be monitored by corporations so they could influence your textbook content. They would tell you what to think. I always tell my students in my courses, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think critically and analytically. These people wanted to teach you what they wanted you to think and wanted you to the way you viewed the world. Forget the way you might view it today. Forget the way you might have viewed it in the past. They wanted to shape how you viewed. They wanted to monitor the media, sort of like what we're seeing today with the FCC. Monitor the media to make sure that national television networks are always unfair. Not fair, but unfair to anybody that is anti-business. That was a huge thing. They also were big on equal time for conservative viewpoints. Not liberal viewpoints, for conservative viewpoints. Now let's think about that for a minute. Powell was saying at the time that the dominant thinking in the United States, and we're talking 1971, so who's the president? Richard Nixon. He's the president at the time, a Republican. That the dominant thinking of the populace was liberal. And that was being expressed in the media. And that was their problem. That's why they asked for the equal time thing, so that conservatives could get their viewpoint out there. Now, your first question you got to ask yourself is, why were not conservative viewpoints getting out there beforehand? Well, maybe the conservative viewpoints weren't all that good. If you want to get your viewpoint out, make the argument and make the good argument. Don't make the crap argument, make the good argument. And that is what sustains your viewpoint. The good argument, not just because somebody's going to put your face in front of the camera and let you spout out whatever you want. It has to do with content as much as anything else. He also said we have to control the courts, that was a vast area of opportunity. He basically told businesses to use the courts to defend free enterprise and property rights and corporate interests against any kind of overregulation. That was one of his big things. And he also, when he talked about political organizations, he stressed that strength lay in united long-range action and urged the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to lead a nationwide political and lobbying effort. In other words, he was basically saying, put more money into the system. Let money be the decider. And this is what we saw with Citizens United, the Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court. Corporations became people. So a lot of things that came out of this one memo basically has been the foundation for many of the ideologies on one side. And that's something that should really concern us all. The fact is that we have now the Heritage Foundation. We've always had the Federalist Society. We've had John Birch Society. All these societies, and basically, if you look at these societies, and I'm not beating up on conservatives, but I'm beating up on the way that they approach these kind of things. It's always rig the system to our advantage. Always rig the system. If you cannot make the good argument, rig the system. And I think that's an important thing to take out of this memo.
Okay, so then you mentioned Heritage. I think Cato Institute is in there, maybe the American Enterprise Institute, the think tanks, right? And then Reagan's president now, this is years later, Reagan's president, and Lee Atwater, who was one of his aides, comes to him with an idea. Let's have our own media. Reagan, who did do away with the FCC's fairness doctrine, turns down Atwater to have a conservative media channel, but George H.W. Bush agrees. Atwater dies before he's able to implement it, but his protege, Roger Ailes, sex offender extraordinaire, joins with Rupert Murdoch, who is a right-wing Australian media mogul, and that creates Fox News and the Fox network. And that's the next level, and I think the one that has been truly devastating to our society, because what Fox has basically given us is close to, if not quite there, an oligarchy, but has also created the ground that was needed for sort of this hands-off approach to, let everything be what it is, and let's not regulate too much. Let's not Let's not have too much law and order, gun violence and drugs and homelessness and gridlock. We got the Social Security crisis because nobody wanted to take a look at that. We have no health care. It was in a Republican debate, and one of the candidates says, "What am I supposed to do? Let him die?" And the audience cheered. That was a Fox audience cheering for letting people die because they don't have health care. And it may have been because they were immigrants or something like that. So all of that comes from Fox. And there was a recent study between Berkeley and Yale, two professors there, one of them had been the student of the other, that showed that if you just put down the TV remote and get off Fox for 1 month, your political orientation will change and your beliefs will change. Just not watching Fox for a month. Unfortunately, the follow-up to that research report showed that most of the people who were involved in that study went back to Fox and are once again what they call these days conservatives, which has nothing to do with conservatism. And Fox has had a horrible, given horrible results to our country. And again, when Trump started coming out of the woodwork talking about the birth certificate during Obama in 2013, I think it was, Fox made him a viable Republican candidate. And so that would be the next big thing that happened that created the monster that we know now. What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. And you mentioned Lee Atwater, and Lee Atwater is an interesting a topic just on himself. Jane Mayer, who back in 2021 writes for the New Yorker, basically wrote an article about the secret papers of Lee Atwater, and she proposes that he was the one who invented the scurrilous tactics that Trump normalized. In those infamous Republican political operatives' unpublished memoir shows that the party came to embrace lies, racial fear-mongering, and winning at any cost. And if you go to that article, and I strongly suggest you do, it's in the New Yorker, it's from May 6, 2021. Jane Mayer is the author. You're going to see a picture of three very infamous people all in one room. Lee Atwater, of course, is going to be there, Paul Manafort, and Roger Stone. And these were the architects of, well, Atwater was already dead by that time, but Manafort and Roger Stone, these were the architects of what we now see today. And I totally agree with Scott. This is not conservatism. If you're sitting in course today, you're saying, oh, they're beating up on conservatives. We are not beating up on conservatives. We are firm believers, and we've said this numerous times on this podcast, that for a successful democracy, you have to have two opposing sides to be able to counterbalance each other, to be able to come together and to work together and work in compromise. We have all agreed upon that. We need a strong conservative Republican Party that can make the argument, that can stand up to the left, but understand that in politics, you don't always get everything that you want. There's no such thing as zero sum. It doesn't work that way. And the best policies are the policies that the two sides can come together, that they can come together and come up with a solution. And they usually will come up with a better solution than either one could come up with on their own. And that is so important to the democracy of today, especially here in the United States. So to the question, is Trump, is he a symptom or is he disease? I'm going to say he's a symptom. I'm not going to say he's disease. I'm saying the disease existed long before this.
Yeah. And okay, so the next part of this, as you mentioned before, Lewis Powell got on the Supreme Court after that memo, right? Nixon put him on the Supreme Court in 1972. In 1976, Buckley versus Vallejo, the court said that free speech and cash are protected by the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. And nobody had ever made that argument before. And so it was certainly not something that an originalist would say, but they broke from that tradition. And that ruling basically says, I'll do a quick quote, those seeking profits, would they given total freedom, would not be the ones to trust the government to keep the government pure. This is Thomas Jefferson, sorry. It has been those seeking wealth were the source of corruption in government. But the Republicans rejected that in 1976 and then again in 1978. Lewis Powell wrote the majority opinion in Boston versus Bilotti. And that also led more to having money speak for you in your First Amendment right. Of course, the big one was Citizens United 2010, which basically led to the overturning of hundreds of state and federal good government laws and the idea that money, that corporations are people and that corporations should have the right to speak. Those decisions, have also contributed to leading us to where we are today. So Lewis Powell mentioned the judiciary in his memo, and that has come to fruition. We have the most conservative court ever. They lie when they say they're originalist or textualist. It is a complete and total lie. So the court has decided a whole bunch of different things that have sort of led us to where we are right now, including, I would say, the election of George W. Bush in 2000, which was a hit job on the truth.
If you can't tell, Scott was a never Busher before he was a never Trumper.
I had Bush derangement syndrome. I don't know. I was too young to have Reagan derangement syndrome, but if I could have, I would have. knowing what I know now.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. All right, so we're going to say that we agree on the fact that he is a symptom. They cannot decide if the problem is the system, just Trump, or the people. What do we think?
Well, I think the people are brainwashed, basically. Yeah. Like Fox has had that effect on people. And, we could also bring up the what's wrong with Kansas thing, right? Where they've managed to come up with wedge issues. And look, let's be clear about this. This is one of the wildest things. The Republican Party's platform on abortion was to stay out of it before Richard Nixon. The Republican Party's platform on abortion was it's between a woman and her doctor. It has nothing to do with politics. But Richard Nixon, one of the worst people ever, needed a wedge issue that he could pry Southern Baptists and Northern Catholics away from the Democratic Party. And he decided that abortion was that issue. And so he started making it an issue. And of course, Reagan picked up on it and brought the evangelicals into the Republican Party. And this has become, and there have been one issue voters on the abortion issue for 20 years or so or more on that. It had never been a political issue before Nixon decided that he had to make it a political issue for his own benefit. So he could defeat who he felt was going to be his biggest rival, which was Robert Kennedy. And of course, when Kennedy was assassinated, he had a clear field. But that was the next sort of all these things kind of moved in parallel. One didn't just build on another, but they tended to build on one thing led to another. And then Alec, remember Alec? I had a friend who used to argue all the time that I, Scott Gersher, is a communist, which I am not, and that I wanted total centralized government control of everything. Completely untrue. It was a straw man that he used in arguments all the time. But Alec, and I would clap back on him and say, Alec is centralized. The Heritage Foundation writes the actual laws through this organization and then they just give it to state and local legislatures and they enact those laws. It is centrally written in Washington, D.C. by the Heritage Foundation. And for whatever reason, he didn't see that as being a problem. But he thought that, Social Security would lead us to communism, or Obamacare would lead us to communism, or whatever else. Having black people in positions of power or having a voice in government would lead to communism, whatever it was. But that organization, ALEC, ALEC, anybody remembers an action committee or something like that, legislative action committee, something along those lines. So they would write all the laws themselves and just put them out there and look for candidates who were willing to bring them up and get them elected, and would bring up local laws. So that's another part of this. And then of course you have the various. I don't know if people know this, but before there was a Project 2025, which I'm sure everybody has heard of. Believe it or not, there was a Project 2021, but they didn't get their candidate in. Trump lost that election. But there was also a Project 2017, and Trump did all that. Trump did about half of Project 2017 in the first year, all through executive orders. Never legislate. Trump does not believe in legislation. All executive orders. And I'm sure right now there's a Project 2029, which is already being written, which is going to be the blueprint for the next administration.
Yes. Just so that you don't think that we are totally against all Republican presidents, I'll go back. Woodrow Wilson, who was a Democrat, was probably one of the worst human beings on the face of the earth. Anyway, so
and Gerald Ford seemed like a nice enough fella.
Oh, Gerald Ford. I think Gerald Ford was great. I do. I think Gerald Ford was.
New York drop dead thing. Yeah, and I'm a New Yorker, and I was living there at the time, and I remember the Daily News headline. But he seemed like a decent enough fellow. Made a huge mistake in pardoning Nixon, I think. Nixon should have been held accountable. Again, that's a slippery slope, and we've seen that we don't hold people accountable, right? Obama didn't hold Bush accountable. Biden didn't hold Trump accountable. Here we are.
Absolutely. And, I think Eisenhower was a pretty good president for the time that he came in post World War II. So we do support some, of the Republican administration. But, to the question, is it the people, Trump, or the system? I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like I'm waffling a little bit. It's all three. The system itself is based on something that was created 250 years ago, because we are in the 250th anniversary of the founding of our nation, kind of. I kind of wonder if South Carolina and the southern states can actually say 250 since they were out for 4 years. So maybe they're only 246. But anyway, I really do think it's a combination of all three. The system needs to be revamped to something that maybe mirrors the conditions as they exist today. The founding fathers, in my mind, were very wise men. There's a lot of things that have been changed in the Constitution since the original Constitution was adapted in 1787. But the fact is that we are not a country that enjoys change very much, and there's a lot of things that we should have changed, such as the Electoral College probably should have gone out the door. Term limits for all of them probably should be enacted. But the fact is that it's a system that makes the rules for the system. So they're not going to make rules that are not going to benefit them. So the system has its issue. Trump is, in my mind, will go down in history as the worst president ever in the history of the United States. He'll beat out James Buchanan, who, if you look up James Buchanan, was probably the most responsible from probably inaction for the Civil War. He basically didn't do anything. So there you have James Buchanan is going down. He'll go down as worse than say Herbert Hoover, who I think in some ways gets a little bit of a bad rap. I think Hoover gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes because he basically was hoping that it would straighten itself out, the Depression kind of thing. He had some faith in that. Well, his faith was misplaced. But I mean, I think there's a lot of things that Hoover could have done that didn't do. But the people, is it the people? Yes. If I was to hang my hat on the one thing that needs to change, it's the attitude of the people. And I was reading an article the other day that came out. It was I think it was in the Atlantic, and I'll give a link to that, where the comment was about power. And in times past, I know the three of us here are all in our 60s, and we can remember a time where power was how much you helped other people, the soft power kind of things that were being done. Today, the attitude is it's power through physical strength, through military might. Power is exhibited by how much you can threaten somebody and make somebody, cower into a corner. And I think the American people have begun to embrace, a lot of the American people, not all, have begun to embrace that. The idea that that the United States has been pushed around for so long. I'm sorry, but if there's been pushing around, we've done it to ourselves in most cases. So I don't subscribe to that ideology. I just don't see it. But the people are the ones that elected a Donald Trump. And I'm going to blame for that. I'm going to blame the independents. And some makes the argument that, well, it wasn't because Kamala Harris was a woman. I truly do not believe the United States is ready for a female president. Why? I don't know. I have no idea. But for some reason, we are still very patriarchal, and we just don't seem to be ready for a female president. Now, if back when Hillary Clinton ran, if she wasn't shoved down our throats like the Democratic Party did, and I think the three of us agree that she was shoved down our throats, and if Biden had not done the process the way he did it, and Kamala Harris was not the candidate in the way it was accomplished, maybe that would have changed. That could very possibly have changed. But unfortunately, both women that have run, and as a major party, their presenting to the populace was distasteful. And that's the Democrats' fault. But the people seem to embrace punishing. They seem to embrace retribution. They seem to embrace, all these, lesser demons of ourselves, where in the day, we always looked at ourselves as better than that. We used to build great big things and do great things. And right now, we're not interested in any of that. We're just not interested in that. Not, what was it? A month ago, Artemis went and circled the moon. That's a huge accomplishment after all these years, to show that we could still do these things. There's a lot we could do without having to punish other people. And I think that so for me, yes, it may sound like a cop-out. I think it's all three, but I think probably top of that list is you've got to change the attitude of the electorate. And one of the attitudes we've got to change is the apathy. We have to get rid of apathy. Vote. Don't sit on your thumbs, and then when it doesn't work out the way you want it to work out, don't sit and cry about it. If you didn't participate in the process, that's your own fault. That's plain and simple your own fault. Only 36% of Democrats voted in the last election. There you have it. That's an awful lot of people.
Wait, let me just comment on two things you
said. Go ahead. Please, go ahead.
Because you just brought up the doing big things thing, and I agree with you 100% on that. And you mentioned Herbert Hoover before, and I will say, I don't know if Herbert Hoover got a bad rap or not, but FDR wasn't much more successful than he was. Despite he eased a lot of pain, but he didn't stop the Great Depression. The only thing that stopped the Great Depression, as we know, was World War II. Now, it wasn't because of the explosions and the death and the killing. It was because on a war footing, the entire country united, and we went from making cars to making tanks and so on and so forth. The war was a driver of industry and innovation, and we don't need a war to do that. And we had an opportunity to do this, but we failed at it because we had the opportunity. We have a crisis. We have a war called climate change, and we need green energy. And we could have taken the lead in green energy. We could have looked at a problem and said, instead of, oh my God, it's a problem, there's nothing we can do about it, or it's not a problem, which is even worse, or it is a problem, but there's nothing we could do about it, or it is a problem, there's nothing we could do about it right now. We used to be able to look at the thing and say, this is an opportunity, and let's make the best of this opportunity. And we're not. We gave it to China. China is the dominant power in the world in electric vehicles, the dominant power in the world in solar power and wind power. We are not. And we need to be. We want to be. And there was plenty of investment There were government, private investments, corporate investments that could have yielded great results, and we could have galvanized this country. We don't hear anymore about the big factories being built down south in formerly moribund places like Dalton, Georgia, which was at one time the carpet capital of the world, but people moved the carpet business to China, Vietnam, whatever, and all of a sudden these enormous factories were going up to address the need for electric batteries and the infrastructure that we need, and we could have done that, and we killed it. We killed it. Donald Trump killed it. We killed it by electing Donald Trump. It is no longer an opportunity for us. Bush did it before that. Bush refused to follow through on the investments that Clinton was willing to make and kill that. Obama revived it. Trump killed it. Biden revived it. Trump killed it. We can do great things. We have not built a connection between New York City and the rest of the country through New Jersey since 1937, people. If you can imagine what the traffic was like back then, I'll tell you something, it's a lot worse now. We could use another building project to get us out of New York City, out of the East Coast to points west and south in this country. We're not doing it. It costs too much money. And part of that, no doubt about it, is government regulation, government getting in the way. It's a lot more costly to do things now because of all the regulations and stuff. No doubt about it. That is a factor. I'm not dismissing it. But the impetus isn't there to begin with. The impetus to do great things is not here. The innovation is here, but we're not doing it here, except for AI and data centers, which has captured the imagination of not just people, but business leaders. So yeah. Mark is right when he says you need to get out and vote. You need to vote smart. You need to vote for smart, good people. And here's something that you could do at Arizona State University. Do a similar experiment to the one that Berkeley and Yale did, and have people put down their Fox, change the channel off of Fox and put down the remote and don't go back to it, and see what the result is. Challenge your parents, your grandparents to put down that damn remote and stop watching Fox for 1 month and see what the difference is. That's a worthy project for this class. And I hope that somebody picks up on that, because it has had a bad result, and that bad result is named Donald Trump.
Yep. Either that, or take a poll of your class. Find the most liberal people in your class. Find the most conservative people in your class. The liberal people have to watch Fox for a month. The conservative people have to watch MS Now or something like that for a month, and see how attitudes might change. How much we are influenced by the media today. And I think that when you ask what is the biggest thing, when the Trump, is the system, is it the people? I think a lot of it also comes back to the media. We have a media that is basically designed to foster the intelligence and foster the thought process of the people that watch it. And remember something. You guys, I'm assuming you're undergrad, maybe you're grad students, I'm really not sure. But if you're about to have a bachelor's degree, you have a higher degree than most of the talking heads that are sitting on most of these shows, both networks. Why would you give your educational academic power to somebody that couldn't graduate from a college? Like, say, a Sean Hannity, who attended 5 colleges, graduated from none. Why would you do that? You've worked hard for your education. You've been educated. Use it. Critically and analytically think what you're told. Don't let some talking head tell you what is and what is not. So that would be my thing. All right, clear plan. Go ahead, Brooke. Sorry, Brooke. Yeah. I know me and Scott have been going along here, and yeah.
No, I've been enjoying listening, but I did want to suggest a book that if the class does not have, it's called Asking the Right Questions, A Guide to Critical Thinking. The authors are Neil Brown, that's Brown with an E, and Stuart M. Keeley. This book it will help you to consider what you're hearing also, and the arguments that people are bringing to you. Always consider who is speaking, who is writing, and what the person wants you to believe. As far as how to fix the American politics, I, at least as an older person, look at you younger people and say, you are the fix because you're the future. And do vote. You can vote now. If you're old enough to vote now, vote this year. Consider running yourself for public office and continue to educate yourself. Continue reading, continue learning, and continue questioning, because you are the future. You are the ones who will fix this.
Okay,
yeah,
so
please.
Yeah, and you know what? And here's something else for you guys to consider. I don't know if I'm sure all of you remember when the Da Vinci Code came out back in 2006. Believe it or not, people actually believe that was real. So don't be a sheep. I guess that would be my biggest thing, and I totally agree. I have more faith in the next generation than I do in ours. So the last question is really quick. You're having a problem deciding how to fix this. So I'm going to do a real quick start with this and try to get through this fast. Number one, we've talked about Trump, we've talked about the people, we've talked about the system. Well, at this point in time, we can't do a whole heck of a lot about Trump. He's going to be with us until 2028, and some people fear even longer than that, but whatever. But what we can do something about is people and our attitudes toward each other and our attitudes toward problems. We can do a lot about that. That's step number one. Because that's step number one, that taking the initiative and going out and voting, that getting out there and getting involved. That doesn't mean you've got to be in protests and things like that. What that means is getting involved. And the best place to get involved is in your own community. That's where it starts. There's a lot. You're at ASU. There's a lot you can get involved in there that can make a true difference, not only in your lives, but in the lives of others. So get yourself involved. This is your society. Active citizenship. Active citizenship. Citizenship in the United States is not all about just your rights and freedoms. It's also about your responsibilities. Make sure that you are taking those responsibilities seriously. And then once you do that, once we change that attitude, then the system can start to be changed. Then we can start changing the system. I'm not saying if you elect in an entirely Democratic Senate and an entirely Democratic Congress and a Democratic president that the system will change, because once again, we have never seen that, and I don't know how much they would want to change the system if it was against their own interest and against their advantage. Well, I guess that's one of those things we'd have to see. But find those people that are going to vote on issues for your best interest and the best interest of your community and your fellow citizens. Those are the people. Do not be a one-issue person, because a lot of people in today's society vote for one issue. Let's say abortion. Oh, he's against abortion. I like him. They ignore the other 50 points of his platform that may be totally against your best interests. You got to go deeper than just one single issue. Be a multi-issue voter, and a multi-issue voter that does, yes, absolutely support you, but supports your community, because the stronger your community is, the better off you are. And then eventually the rest of this stuff will take care of. Trump will be gone someday, and the system, if we're active and if we call for it enough, and if the people take back the power, the system will change if it is demanded. And that's how, in my mind, that's how you got to start. Scott, how you fixing it, bud?
Sounds good, man.
Sounds good. Scott loves it.
Read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and be kind.
That's right. Always try, from one of my favorite sci-fis, Doctor Who, always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind. And hopefully, John, we gave you something. You might have to split this up into two, but I hope we answered the questions as best as we could. And anytime you want, you just let us know, and we'll be happy to address whatever you want. So from South Carolina, the state of Connecticut and the state of New York, where the three of us all are differently. We wish all of you at ASU the best. And
Go Sun Devils.
Go Sun Devils. Absolutely.
Yep. So thank you and take care.
And that's all the time we have for today's episode. The Nova Society is a production of Nova Society Media, a division of the Phoenix Research Institute. We want to thank our production partners, Buzzsprout, who hosts the Nova Society, Audacity, our editing team, Apple Podcasts, the largest source of podcast and music online, Spotify, the most popular platform for the Nova Society, and iHeartRadio, your destination for all things music and podcasting. The Nova Society is available on all of these and other quality platforms listed in our description. And most importantly, we want to thank you, our listeners. Without your support, the Nova Society could not be possible. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing on the platform of your choice. It's easy, it's free, and helps our channel grow. For questions or comments, you can reach us at nova.society.podcast@gmail.com. So on behalf of Dr. Brooklyn Ann Weldon, Dr. Scott Gershwer, and all of our production partners here at the Nova Society, I'm Dr. Mark Bound. Remember, the true power of society is knowledge. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again next time. We'd like to thank our sponsor for this episode, the Journal of Interdisciplinary Conflict Sciences, the JICS. This open access journal, double peer-reviewed, provides a platform for emerging scholars to publish their work and engage in meaningful dialogue across disciplines. The JICS is currently accepting article submissions on an ongoing basis and is published through the NovaWorks Scholarly Repository at Nova Southeastern University. You'll find a link to the journal in our episode description.